The foundations of modern sci-fi. You like that pun? Or do you just not get it? Well, anyway, the people that know me from Reddit, there's like 2 of you, might notice that my username is some variation of Farstar. Despite what Googling that name shows, no, it's not from Star Wars. It's from the thing that Star Wars is copying. The Foundation. Many people are aware of the influences on sci-fi that writers like Heinlein or Lovecraft had. What I don't see is people talk as much about Asimov, despite the fact that I feel like his contributions are much greater than the other 2. I'm sure I'm biased in this appraisal. My dad always loved Asimov, and Lovecraft has never been my particular cup of tea. Outside the obvious racism, I mean the shadow over Innsmouth, the bad guys are rural town people, where interracial marriage is leading to the degradation of upper-class white people, and that's just a metaphor I could be reading into. There are plenty of times that it's not that subtle. No, outside of that, I've just never found the idea of existential dread scary.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
Yeah, welcome to the club, pal.
You'll die at one point and you're just a tiny part of the larger universe. Yep. Maybe it's my stoic nature, but I've never had trouble accepting that. As to Heinlein, I've just never really read much of him. I'm aware of his impact, and this is not a diss, just I've never been that into him. That said, this is about Asimov and the impact he's had for good or ill on sci-fi. I'm going to mention a really big ill at some point. I'm not great at structure, so I'm just going to break this down into sections that I can easily talk about. This ended up being structured into some ideas, some setting details, and some plot points. So yeah, the first part is about the ideas that come from the Foundation. Brendan Sanderson was very obviously influenced by Asimov. Yeah, Asimov's I, Robot and Foundation series are linked. It doesn't quite work here or there, and there are a few things that don't completely add up. And the idea of the MCU before the MCU isn't exactly new. Namor and the Human Torch first met, I think, in 1939? That said, something that's a little more obscure from Sanderson is... Alright, so in Sanderson's series, The Stormlight Archive, spoiler alert, there's this group of people who call themselves the Diagram. They're named this because they follow a diagram that supposedly tells them the future by combining math and psychology. This is basically Asimov's psychohistory. For those unaware, this is the main conceit of the Foundation series, that the history of the future can be scientifically approximated. I think something like this happened in the first Dune book as well, but it's been a while since I read that. So don't take my word on that. But yeah, if you've seen something about where they're predicting the future by a super advanced kind of math, this is likely an idea that came from Asimov. This next part is going to be about 2 series because it's mostly about setting.
In Star Wars.
Yeah, these 2 great empires are really just copies of the first great galactic empire. Asimov was reportedly reading the books Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, and that gave him the idea to do the Fall of Rome, but in space. The influence on Star Wars can be seen in the first Star Wars movie when they mention the Senate and the remnants of the Old Republic.
Report in the Imperial Senate.
The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. I have just received word that the Emperor has dissolved the Council permanently. The last remnants of the Old Republic have been swept away.
Too bad we never got an explanation on how that happened. Shut up. But that does bring up the capital. As far as I'm aware, Asimov was the first one to do the planet-sized city. I believe Lucas even admitted that the capital planet of Coruscant was based on the Foundation planet of Trantor, which basically served the same purposes, the capital of the government for the Empire. I'm not the biggest 40k fan, but I think Earth serves the same purpose as the center of government in 40k. Other than that, the influence is obvious. The Imperium in 40k is basically a collapsing Roman Empire. They even use Latin names for everything. Well, like already mentioned, 40k ain't the first space Rome, and surely you're not the first one built on the collapse. Other than large parts of the setting, the other contributions being Paradise Lost and generic fantasy, the tech priests of Mars are basically the Church of Science from part 3 of the first book, The Mayors. The Foundation used religion to subdue the surrounding warlords by indoctrinating their youth and anyone who can operate their tech into believing in the Great Galactic Spirit and its holy enclave of Terminus. Terminus is the name of the planet the first Foundation is on. There's also the tech men of the Inner Empire at that time that share the trait of not knowing how this stuff really works, but just maintaining it. The grim darkness of the future is exactly what Harry Seldon was trying to prevent. Yeah, the two foundations are the foundation of the Second Great Galactic Empire. The name makes a little more sense now, doesn't it? This next part is going to be about character and plot points. Data is R. Daniil Oliver. The R stands for robot. This character is more important in the Robots books, which are nothing like the movie, really. But yeah, basically Data has a lot of the same mannerisms, and I remember hearing through the grapevine that Roddenberry mentioned that it was an influence on TNG. I can't find a good source on that, so take that with a grain of salt. There are other various things in Star Trek that come from the Foundations, but I haven't done a rewatch in a while. But there's one series that I think takes a lot from the Foundation. Yes, Mass Effect takes many plot points from the Foundation. For starters, I remember when Andromeda came out, someone called the plot stupid. You know, sending 100,000 people to the ass end of nowhere to avoid the inevitable collapse of a civilization as we know it. Yeah, that's the first Foundation book. The Andromeda Initiative might as well have called itself the Andromeda Foundation. You also had this side quest where the Cerberus scientists were using some mind control device on aliens, and I think that should have been called the Mule, because that was basically the explanation given as Mentalics in the Second Foundation. And I think this was a debunked theory at some point as well. Okay, so this is about half the reason I decided to do this, but you know when you were playing Mass Effect 3 and you got to the ending and it felt like the ending to a different story? That's because it is. The ending of Mass Effect 3 is basically the ending of Foundation's Edge. You see, the protagonist of Foundation's Edge, Golan Trevize, sometimes just knows the right answer, for reasons that are not really explained. But by the end of Foundation's Edge, he's asked to pick between siding with the first Foundation, which will lead them into a war to unite the galaxy, which the second Foundation insists will lead to another collapse like the first Empire. The Star Child implies something like this will happen if you choose the Destroy ending in Mass Effect. If you're wondering how the hell the Star Child knows these things, well, the answer is psychohistory. But psychohistory doesn't exist in Mass Effect, so there's no reason. The next option Trevize gets is to side with the second Foundation. You see, the second Foundations are the one actually doing psychohistory, so siding with them will stop history from repeating itself, but this will lead to a very static galaxy in which nothing really happens. This is exactly like what will happen in the Control ending, as we won't be repeating ourselves, but everything stays very static. The final option, the one Trevize actually picks, is to side with Gaia. You know the Mentalics thing I mentioned? Well, there's this planet called Gaia where everyone and everything has that. Meaning everything and everyone feels each other's emotions and can pass memories to one another. You can even store memories in rocks and stuff. Well, choosing this option, it starts forming this into a galaxy-wide scale called Galaxia. I hope I don't need to explain how this is similar to the Synthesis ending, as I was trying to find words that didn't use synthesis in that explanation. Everyone will see everyone as the same, and there will be no need for conflict, yada yada yada. The funny thing is, this was chosen in Foundation's Edge because the time it would take to implement it, it's the most reversible option, which is not the case in Mass Effect 3. So, overall, Mass Effect 3's ending is an impressive level of homage and completely missing the point. So yeah, these are some ideas, some settings, and some plot points taken from Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. There's like a dozen Easter eggs and such in modern sci-fi too.
It's already supplanted the Encyclopedia Galactica as the standard repository of all knowledge and wisdom.
The Encyclopedia Galactica is a reoccurring thing throughout the series, but this was mostly an exercise in exploring larger concepts, so I'm not mentioning all the little Easter eggs I've noticed throughout time. This was fun. I hope to do this more in the future.